So, with the events of the 2010s, four general elections and three divisive referendums, two of those were particularly divisive. I say three because people sometimes forget the AV referendum in 2011, I think it was. Um, so, with that particularly turbulent political decade, some people might sort of look at the title of this video and think, "What? What are you talking about, Nathan? We're not stable." Well, worth looking a bit at history. I have a keen interest in history, and if you look at the United Kingdom and especially Great Britain, um, it's actually worth bearing in mind how fortunate we actually are. Um, so, if you look around the world, there are a lot of trouble spots, and I'm not just talking about war zones. I'm talking about countries that have been plagued by coup d'etats and political instability in that sense. Take Thailand, for example. It's had something like, I don't know what the number is, but it's had a lot of coup d'etats since the constitutional reforms of 1932, um, which I think is classed as a revolution, the events of that year. A little bit of Thai history. And if you look around the world, Myanmar is another example. It's just a country that it has had a long history of coup d'etats. A lot of countries that emerged from the post-colonial era with independence then struggled with very brutal and bloody civil wars. Um, and even the United States' recent events have kind of put question marks on American political stability, although the basic elements are still there. Joe Biden was sworn in, no major trouble occurred as had been anticipated. That could just be because of a heavy security. Certainly, recent months have been quite exceptional in American politics. But even looking at our European neighbours, some of them only emerged from or only emerged into democracy relatively recently. If you look at Spain, it's only the 1970s, early 80s that Spain really became a democracy. It was, of course, coming out of the shadow of Franco. If we look at Italy, um, Italy is a great country, and I don't intend any of this to be disrespectful to anyone else. But Italy's now got a new prime minister, Mario Draghi, the former central banker, was named by Forbes as one of the most powerful men in the world a few years ago. It's going to be interesting to see what direction that takes. But looking at Italy, they've had 29 government administrations since World War II. We've had 16. Japan's another country that has had a lot of changes in prime minister. Now, I should say that in the case of Italy and Japan, there's still peaceful transfers of power. It's not like I don't want to distort that. But, you know, France, during the war, obviously France was occupied, and then right up to probably the 1950s, there were still reprisals against those who had collaborated. Understandably so. These were raw emotions. Germany went through a very challenging history. It went through partition and reunification. Um, so really, when you look at the international scale, um, there aren't many countries that are as politically stable as Britain. There would be countries in Northern Europe that haven't had any major domestic upheaval. And this is not to say that Britain hasn't had problems. I don't want to be misunderstood there. This isn't intended to be a sort of bombastic um, video where I'm saying, "Oh, we're the best." That's not what this is about. Actually, it's about for Britons to consider why we need to protect this. So let's have a look at what we have had. The obvious one that strikes my mind in terms of domestic conflict is the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And that was, of course, centred on Northern Ireland. It did spill over onto the mainland with the IRA's bombing campaigns and also into the Republic of Ireland. That was, a tragic aspect of history, and the legacy is still lingering on some level, although the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland have moved on. But 3,500 dead. bombings, shootings, lots of bitterness on both sides. So, being from Northern Ireland, I would never ever downplay that. But looking at the mainland, the last time the British mainland actually had significant domestic conflict, you have to go back to 1746 and the last Jacobite Rising. That is literally as far back as you need to go to get significant domestic conflict. That's why if you Google last battle fought on British soil, most of the entries, there's some debate over this, but most of the entries quote those battles. For example, Culloden as being the last battle on British soil, the last battle on English soil, even further back, the Battle of Sedgemoor during the Monmouth Rebellion in 1685. I mean, we're talking 335 years ago now, 336 years ago. So, why does this matter? It matters because we can't take peace and stability for granted. As an example, in 2010, when Gordon Brown's Labour Party lost the election and there was those frantic negotiations for a coalition government, um, Brown may have clung on for a few days and there may have been tense negotiations and it was still quite an unprecedented situation. But ultimately, it was a peaceful transfer of power. David Cameron went into Downing Street, Gordon Brown left. There was no fighting between Labour supporters and the Tories. I heard about one or two scuffles in town halls, but nothing serious. That's an example of the peaceful transfer of power, and that was one of our more tense elections. You know, an average election, an unremarkable election, say the 2001 election. Um, in those sort of situations, it's it's almost mundane. You have that sort of frenetic month of campaigning and party leaders making their pitches and leaflets going through the doors and debates. The televised debates are a relatively recent thing in this country. But in the end, one party will form a majority, or if they don't, they negotiate. But most of the time, a majority is formed and their leader goes to the palace and becomes prime minister. It's it's something that we are used to. It's something that happens every 3 to 6 years. Well, actually, the fixed term parliaments mean we have to have general elections within 5 years. But the point is, it's familiar, it's consistent. Some might say it's a little boring. I don't think it is. I think general elections are quite exciting, quite interesting. But the point is that's an example of our political stability. And you know, people in Britain, like I say, complaining is sort of a national sport, complaining about politicians. But we do have to consider that in other parts of the world, you know, being on the wrong political side, you could end up with a bullet in your head or in prison. You know, so the peaceful transfer of power and the political stability that we have is something that we really, really need to value now. That's not to say there aren't serious question marks right now post Brexit, especially, the Scottish thing, the Scottish independence issue is definitely going to come up again. Um, I will probably make a full video on that. Um, you know, I'm not sitting on the fence. I'm against it. I believe in the United Kingdom. I don't see anything that good that can come out of breaking this country up, the state up. Um, and fundamentally, I think the Scottish nationalist argument is nonsensical. They want to leave a 400-year-old union in order to stay in a 47-year-old union under the argument of getting more independence. But staying in the EU will not get more independence. That's just a nonsensical argument. And this is coming from someone who voted Remain. So, another issue with that, and it's irrefutable, Scottish nationalists cannot deny this because the facts speak for themselves. More Scots in 2014 voted to stay in the United Kingdom than Scots in 2016 who voted to stay in the European Union. So for the nationalists to say that they have the democratic mandate, I think that needs to be challenged. I really do. Yes, it's true that recent polls have shown a margin of Scots now possibly favour independence, but polls do fluctuate. And what are we going to have in never ending? Are we going to have a situation whereby every time the SNP don't get the way, they're going to demand another referendum? Um, It can't work that way, and that will potentially create instability. I don't think it'll create violence. I hope it doesn't. Although, some emotions do run very high. I was in Edinburgh on referendum day in 2014, and, I was with a pro-union group, and we got a bit of abuse. There was no violence, but there was a bit of name calling, and, it was tense enough. Was tense enough. That was ugly. I remember Jim Murphy, the Labour MP, he was vocally in favour of the um, Vote No campaign, and he got a lot of verbals. Um, Referendums are divisive by nature. I don't like them because Brexit, the EU referendum and the Scottish referendum just show that all referendums do is divide people and cause bitterness and cause theories and counter theories and um, defenders of it will say it's direct democracy. I just think it creates a lot more harm than good. Um, and it's worth remembering that we had a referendum on the EU in 1975. The Prime Minister pointed this out. The referendum on the EU was 2016, so that's a gap of 41 years. Um, as it stands, it's only been less than 7 years since the Scottish referendum. I think that's far too early to have another referendum, just because they happen to have the momentum right now. Like I say, opinion polls vary. It could well be that people feel Sturgeon's handled the virus better than Johnson has. That's why they happen to be doing well right now. But there's also news that the SNP is having significant infighting. The SNP's been in power in Scotland for quite a while now, and with any political party, there comes a point when there's sort of a natural, time limit, in the sense that people at some point just get tired of them. So I really think the UK government would be within its constitutional and legal right to refuse that. It probably wouldn't be great for PR because then the Nationals will say, "Oh look, Johnson is disrespecting democracy." Well, Boris Johnson and the British government need to fire back and say the Nationalists haven't respected the 2014 vote because they haven't. Anyway, I digress. I'll just summarise, conclude here. One of the things I really, really do value about living in Britain is this political stability. Yes, sometimes politics can get very heated and people can have very, very strong views on policy areas. Occasionally we have disorder, we have occasionally riots, right? But it's never got to the point where there's significant threat of a revolution or a coup d'etat. I know in the 70s there was rumours that Harold Wilson may have faced a coup d'etat, but I don't think there was massive weight behind that. Um, and MI5's denied it. I don't know. There might have been something in it, but regardless, it never materialized, even if there was something in it. So I'll just conclude with that. We need to take this stability for granted. We can't take this stability for granted. I'm not saying grateful might be the wrong word because it's not something that we should say thank you for. It's something we should have. But sometimes when people say, "Oh, things are awful," and it is just worth bearing this in mind. That's all. And I know people in some of these trouble spots in the world, and I just have profound sympathy for the ordinary person that suffers every time. Okay, thanks for watching.